The reservation was for 8 o'clock. Table 7, window seat, the best in the house. I'd set it myself 3 hours ago, taking extra care with every detail, because the hostess wouldn't stop talking about who had booked it. I arranged the premium white tablecloth with geometric precision, smoothing out invisible wrinkles until the fabric lay perfectly flat. I polished the crystal stemware until it caught the candlelight like diamonds, turning each glass slowly to check for spots or smudges. I positioned the single orchid in its slim vase at the precise angle that made it look effortlessly elegant rather than deliberately placed, the way the manager had shown me during my first week. That orchid cost more than my weekly tips. The wine that had been pre-ordered for this table cost more than my rent. And the man who had made the reservation was, according to everyone who worked here, one of the most eligible bachelors in the entire city, Daniel Chen, tech billionaire, cover of Forbes at 32, the kind of name that made people sit up straighter and check their appearance in reflective surfaces. I didn't care about any of that, not really. I cared about getting through my shift without incident, collecting enough tips to cover my electric bill, and going home to my tiny apartment where I could take off these uncomfortable shoes and pretend that my life was going somewhere meaningful. I had been working at Lumiere for 2 years now, 2 years of white tablecloths and crystal glasses and watching people spend more on a single bottle of wine than I made in a week. 2 years of smiling at customers who looked right through me, of being invisible in plain sight, of existing in the margins of other people's important evenings. It wasn't what I'd planned for my life, but plans have a way of crumbling when reality gets involved. He arrived at 7:45. I noticed him the moment he walked through the door, the way everyone noticed him. There was something about the way he moved, confident but not arrogant, that drew the eye and held it. The hostess fumbled her greeting, her carefully rehearsed welcome dissolving into nervous laughter. The other waitresses suddenly found reasons to drift toward the front of the restaurant, adjusting napkins that didn't need adjusting, refilling water glasses that were already full. I watched from my station near the kitchen, arms crossed, trying to look unimpressed. He was handsome, devastatingly so. The kind of handsome that seemed almost unfair, like someone had decided to give one person more than their share and left the rest of us to make do. His suit was navy, so perfectly tailored it had to be custom-made, fitting his broad shoulders like it had been sewn onto him. His watch caught the candlelight when he moved, throwing tiny sparks of gold across the white tablecloth. He had dark hair, darker eyes, and a jaw that could have been carved by a sculptor who understood that beauty and danger were often the same thing. He walked to table 7 with the quiet confidence of someone who knew he belonged in places like this, someone who had never in his life wondered if he could afford the appetizers, someone who had never calculated the tip percentage while pretending to study the dessert menu. I took a deep breath, smoothed my apron, and approached the table. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Lumiere." My voice came out steady, professional, revealing nothing of the strange flutter in my chest. "May I start you with something to drink? Or would you prefer to wait for your guest?" He looked up at me, and I felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing pressing against my skin. Those dark eyes swept over my face, not in the leering way some customers looked at waitresses, but assessing, curious. Like I was a puzzle he hadn't expected to encounter in this place, at this moment. "The wine's already been ordered," he said. His voice was lower than I'd expected, with a slight roughness to it that didn't match his polished appearance. "A 2015 Chateau Margaux. My sister arranged it." He said this last part with a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a smile that suggested complicated feelings about the arrangement. "She has expensive taste and my credit card," he added. "Dangerous combination?" "I'll have that brought right out, sir. And 2 glasses?" "Please." The smile faded slightly, replaced by something that looked almost like resignation. "Blind date. My sister's idea. She's convinced that I work too much and need to, and I quote, 'Remember that human connection exists outside of quarterly earnings reports and board meetings.'" I laughed before I could stop myself. It was such an unexpected thing for him to say. This admission of being set up by a meddling sibling, delivered with such dry self-awareness. It made him seem almost human, this billionaire in his perfect suit, waiting for a stranger to judge whether he was worth her time. "That sounds like something a sister would say," I offered, breaking the professional distance I usually maintained with customers. "You have siblings?" "2 brothers, both older. They're convinced I'm going to die alone surrounded by cats because I haven't been on a date in—" I caught myself, heat rising to my cheeks. This was not appropriate Waitress customer conversation. This was not the invisible, efficient service I was supposed to provide. "I'm sorry, you don't need to hear about my dating life, or complete lack thereof." "No, please." He gestured to the empty chair across from him with a wry expression. "I'm sitting here waiting to be judged by a complete stranger my sister found on some dating app. Your dating life can't possibly be more depressing than mine currently feels. You might be surprised. Try me." I glanced around the restaurant. It was busy, but not overwhelming, the pleasant hum of a successful Friday evening. My other tables were settled with their appetizers, and Mr. Harrison, the manager, was in the back dealing with some crisis involving the sous chef and a misdelivered shipment of truffles. I had a few minutes before anyone would notice or care. 8 months, I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty. That's how long it's been since my last date, and that one ended with him asking if I could cover the check because he'd supposedly forgotten his wallet at home. The man's eyebrows rose, genuine surprise crossing his features. "He made you pay?" "It gets better." I watched him use that same wallet to tip the valet on our way out. A 20. Right in front of me like I wasn't even there. "That's—" He shook his head slowly, something like real indignation flickering in his dark eyes. "That's impressively terrible. Actually impressive in its terribleness." I like to think I dodged a bullet. Anyone who tips a valet more than he tips his date, or in this case makes his date pay while still managing to tip the valet, is not someone I need in my life. He laughed then, and it transformed his entire face. The sharp angles softened, the guarded look in his eyes, that careful distance I'd noticed when he first sat down, gave way to something warmer and more genuine. He went from intimidatingly handsome to dangerously appealing in the space of a single breath, and I felt something shift in my chest that I absolutely could not afford to feel. "I'm Daniel," he said, extending his hand across the table like we were equals, like I wasn't wearing an apron with a small coffee stain I'd been meaning to treat. "Daniel Chen." The name hit me about half a second later than it should have. Daniel Chen, as in Chen Industries, as in the tech empire that had been splashed across every business magazine and financial news site for the past several years, as in one of the youngest billionaires in the country, the man who had revolutionized cloud computing and made his first 100 million before he turned 25. And here he was, sitting in my section, shaking my hand, making small talk about bad dates with a waitress who couldn't afford the appetizers at his table. I started, suddenly hyper-aware of my scuffed shoes, the small hole developing in my left stocking, the fact that my ponytail was probably coming loose after 6 hours on my feet. "Maya." He nodded toward my name tag with that slight smile. I noticed. Of course he had. Men like him noticed everything. It was probably how they got to be men like him in the first place. That attention to detail, that ability to read a room and the people in it. "Well, Mr. Chen," I said, recovering what remained of my professional composure, "I'll get that wine for you right away. I hope your date tonight is worthy of the selection. The Chateau Margaux is truly exceptional." Here's hoping. But his voice held doubt, and his eyes had already drifted toward the entrance with the resigned expression of someone expecting disappointment. Someone who had been disappointed before, perhaps too many times. I went to retrieve the wine, and I told myself firmly that this was the end of it. A nice moment, a brief, unexpected connection, the kind of thing that happens sometimes between strangers and means nothing at all by the next morning. He was Daniel Chen. I was a waitress working double shifts to pay off student loans I'd taken out for a degree I'd never finished. We existed in entirely different universes that had briefly overlapped, and soon the normal order would reassert itself. His date arrived at 8:07.
I was watching from behind the service station, pretending to polish glasses that were already spotless, when she made her entrance. 7 minutes late, which I noted with the part of my brain that couldn't seem to stop tracking everything about Table 7. She was exactly what you'd expect for a billionaire's blind date.
Tall, willowy, with the kind of effortless blonde highlights that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her dress was red, designer, probably something with a name I would mispronounce if I tried to say it. She was beautiful in that polished, high-maintenance way that required teams of professionals and unlimited resources, the kind of beautiful that always made me acutely aware of my practical ponytail, my sensible non-slip work shoes, and my complete lack of anything designer. The hostess practically tripped over herself, leading the woman to Table 7. I watched Daniel rise to greet her, pulling out her chair with practiced courtesy, pouring her wine with elegant precision.
He was saying something that made her smile, and she was laughing in that performative way people laugh on first dates when they want to seem charming and agreeable. I told myself to stop watching. I went back to my other tables, because that's what waitresses do. We don't get to sit with billionaires.
We don't get swept into fairy tales. We get sore feet and mediocre tips, and the occasional glimpse into lives we'll never lead before returning to the reality of dirty dishes and customers who snap their fingers for attention. But I kept watching anyway. I couldn't seem to help it. 23 minutes. That's how long the date lasted. I know because I tracked every excruciating moment, finding excuses to drift past their table, to refill water glasses at nearby stations, to hover and observe in a way that would have definitely gotten me written up if Mr. Harrison had been paying any attention. The date started out promising enough. Introductions, pleasantries, the standard choreography of two strangers trying to determine if they might want to see each other again. Daniel was attentive, leaning forward slightly, asking questions, listening to her answers with what appeared to be genuine interest. But by minute 7, the woman in red was checking her phone under the table. Not subtly glancing, actually pulling it out and scrolling, her attention clearly elsewhere while Daniel was mid-sentence about something. By minute 12, she'd stopped even pretending to listen to whatever he was saying and was openly scanning the restaurant like she was looking for someone more interesting, or maybe planning her escape route. By minute 18, she excused herself to the bathroom and spent 5 full minutes there, presumably texting friends about how this was going, or maybe swiping through other dating profiles. When she came back to the table, she didn't sit down. I was close enough to hear every word, refilling water glasses at the neighboring table with entirely unnecessary thoroughness. "I'm sorry," she said, and the tone of her voice made it clear she wasn't sorry at all. "This just isn't going to work." Daniel's expression didn't change, his face a careful mask of composure, but I saw his hand tighten almost imperceptibly around the stem of his wine glass. "We've been talking for 20 minutes. That hardly seems like enough time to make that kind of determination." "It's enough for me." She was already gathering her designer clutch, sliding her phone into it with practiced efficiency, clearly eager to be somewhere else. "Look, you seem nice enough. You're obviously successful, but I'm looking for someone more available, emotionally present. You seem completely married to your job." "I run a company, a large one. It requires considerable attention." "See, that's exactly what I mean." She shook her head with something that looked almost like pity. Like she was doing him a favor by leaving. "You're the type of man who thinks buying an expensive dinner is the same thing as making a genuine emotional effort. I need more than a nice restaurant and good wine. I need presence, real connection, someone who's actually there, fully engaged when they are sitting across from me." Daniel's jaw tightened visibly. "You haven't touched the wine." "I don't drink on first dates. Calories." She shrugged, like this explained everything, like her entire assessment of his character was somehow related to her dietary restrictions. "Anyway, it was interesting to meet you. Good luck with everything." She walked out without looking back, not a single glance over her shoulder, just clicked her designer heels across the marble floor, collected her coat from the hostess, and disappeared through the front door, like the last 23 minutes had been nothing more than a minor scheduling inconvenience in her busy evening. Daniel sat perfectly still for a long moment after she left. He stared at the empty chair across from him, at the untouched wine glass, at the place setting that had been so carefully arranged for a guest who had found him unworthy after less than half an hour. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached for the bottle of Chateau Margaux and poured himself a very full glass. Around the restaurant, I could feel people pretending not to have noticed what just happened. The couple at table 4 exchanged loaded glances over their risotto. The business dinner at table 9 suddenly became very interested in their contract negotiations. The unspoken consensus was clear. Billionaire or not, successful or not, handsome or not, nobody wanted to be caught openly watching a man get dumped on a blind date. Nobody except me. Maybe it was the wine he'd bought that nobody was going to drink now. That beautiful, expensive bottle going to waste because some woman had decided 20 minutes was long enough to judge an entire human being. Maybe it was the way his jaw had tightened when she called him emotionally unavailable, like she'd found a bruise he'd been trying to keep hidden, a wound he thought he'd protected. Maybe it was just the end of a very long shift in a moment of exhaustion-fueled insanity that short-circuited my common sense. Whatever it was, I found myself walking toward table 7. Not to clear plates because there weren't any plates to clear. They hadn't even ordered food. Not to refill water because his glass was still full to the brim. Just walking, one foot in front of the other, like my feet had made a decision my brain hadn't been consulted on, and definitely wouldn't have approved. I stopped at the empty chair, the one that was probably still warm from its brief occupation, and before I could think better of it, before the sensible voice in my head could remind me that I needed this job and couldn't afford to do anything stupid, I sat down. Daniel Chen looked up, and the surprise on his face was almost worth the risk of unemployment. "What are you doing?" "Saving you from the pity stares," I said, reaching across the table and picking up the wine glass his date had abandoned without ever touching. I took a sip, and it was incredible, smooth and complex, with layers of flavor I couldn't begin to identify, probably more expensive per ounce than anything I'd ever drunk in my life. Also, this wine is far too good to waste on someone who counts calories on a first date. He stared at me. I stared back, my heart hammering against my ribs, wondering what the hell I was doing and why I couldn't seem to stop. "You know I could get you fired for this," he said slowly, but there was something in his voice that wasn't quite a threat, something that sounded almost like curiosity. "You probably could. Mr. Harrison, my manager, has been looking for an excuse to write me up ever since I told him his new tie was ugly last month. It really was ugly, though. Puce with little yellow diamonds. Nobody should wear puce." I took another sip of the wine, smaller this time, savoring the way it seemed to unfold on my tongue. "But here's the thing, Mr. Chen. You looked like you could use some company, and she was wrong about you. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me except what you've read in magazines. I haven't read any magazines about you." This was a lie. Everyone had read at least one article about Daniel Chen at some point, but it felt like the right thing to say. "What I do know is that you showed up 15 minutes early for a date with a stranger, which means you were nervous and you cared about making a good impression. I know you pulled out her chair and poured her wine and actually tried to have a real conversation instead of just talking about yourself like most men do on dates. I know you ordered a very expensive bottle of wine even though you had no idea if she would appreciate it or even drink it, because you wanted the evening to be special." I set down the glass and met his eyes directly.
That's not someone who thinks buying dinner is the same as making an effort. That's someone who's actually trying. Someone who wanted this to work. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever, filled with something I couldn't quite name. The restaurant noise faded to a distant hum. The other diners, the clinking glasses, the soft music, all of it seemed to belong to another world, another dimension, while our little table existed in a bubble of suspended time. Then, slowly, Daniel Chen smiled. It wasn't the polished, professional smile he'd given me when I first approached the table, the one that looked like it had been practiced in mirrors and refined through countless business negotiations. This was something different, realer, warmer, a little bit broken around the edges, like a piece of pottery that had been cracked and put back together with gold. "You are either very brave or very foolish," he said. "My brothers would definitely say foolish, but they also think I'm going to die surrounded by cats, so their judgment on my life choices is questionable at best." He laughed then, actually laughed, and it was a sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised me. Like he'd forgotten he knew how to make it. Like laughter was something he'd misplaced somewhere along the way to building his empire, and had just unexpectedly found again. "I'm Daniel," he said, as if we were meeting for the first time, as if we were starting something new.
"Maya." I clinked my stolen wine glass gently against his. "But you already knew that." I did. He reached for the bottle and topped off both our glasses, his movements more relaxed now, the tension in his shoulders slowly unwinding. "So, Maya, the waitress, who steals expensive wine and sits with strangers who've just been dumped. Tell me something real. What's your story?" "Who says I have a story? Everyone has a story, and you didn't even hesitate before sitting down at this table."
His dark eyes held mine, searching for something. "That tells me you're either completely reckless, or you understand something about moments like this, about what it feels like to be left behind." The observation cut closer to the bone than I wanted to admit. "Maybe a little of both," I said quietly.
"So tell me, what made a woman like you become a waitress at a place like this? And I don't mean that the way it probably sounded. How did you mean it? I mean you're clearly intelligent, observant. You read people like books. You knew that woman wasn't right for me before she even sat down, didn't you?" I didn't answer, but something in my expression must have confirmed it. "So why are you here? Serving wine to people who don't appreciate it? Working hours that probably destroy your social life? Getting your feet hurt in shoes that definitely aren't comfortable no matter what they claim?" I was quiet for a moment, tracing the rim of my glass with one finger, deciding how much truth to offer this stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all. I was going to be a chef," I finally said. "Went to culinary school, the whole thing. Had plans to open my own restaurant someday, something small but special. The kind of place where every dish tells a story and people leave feeling like they experienced something meaningful. What happened?" "Life happened. My dad got sick, real sick, and insurance didn't cover everything. My mom couldn't work and take care of him at the same time. Someone had to step up, and my brothers both had families already, kids who needed them. I shrugged, trying to make it seem smaller than it was. So I dropped out, took the first job that would pay the bills, and then 2 years just happened. The way time does when you're not paying attention." Daniel was quiet, his expression thoughtful rather than pitying, which I appreciated. "You gave up your dream for your family." "I postponed it. There's a difference." The lie came easily. I'd told it to myself so many times. Someday things will be different. Someday I'll go back. And in the meantime, you pour wine and observe everything and sit down with sad billionaires who can't seem to get a second date to save their lives. Something like that. I managed to smile. "Your turn. Why did what she said bother you so much? And don't tell me it didn't. Because you were staring at that empty chair like it owed you money." "Like it owed me an explanation," he corrected. Then he sighed, and for a moment the billionaire facade cracked completely, revealing someone younger and more uncertain underneath. "It bothered me because she was right. Not about everything. The dinner comment was unfair, but the rest of it." He turned his wine glass slowly in his hands, watching the light play through the deep red liquid. "I am married to my job. I have been for years. I prioritize work over everything else because work is something I understand, something I can control. The company has rules that make sense. Input leads to output. Effort leads to results. It's predictable in a way that people never are. And lonely," he looked up, meeting my eyes. "Yes, incredibly lonely. But lonely is safe. Lonely doesn't leave you in the middle of dinner because it's decided you're not worth its time. Lonely doesn't keep you warm either. No, it doesn't." We sat there in silence for a moment that felt significant. Two strangers who had somehow stumbled past the small talk into something realer and more vulnerable than either of us had expected. "Can I tell you something?" I asked, "since we're apparently doing confessions now?" At this point, I feel like we're past the normal rules of conversation. Say whatever you want. I think the loneliness isn't really about working too much. I think it's about being afraid to let anyone see the version of you that doesn't have all the answers.
The version that shows up 15 minutes early because he's nervous about a blind date. The version that orders expensive wine because he wants to make a good impression on a stranger. The version that stays and drinks alone because getting walked out on actually hurts, even when you're supposed to be too successful to care. Daniel was very still. That's remarkably perceptive for someone who's known me for less than an hour. I'm a waitress. People watching is essentially job training. You learn to read expressions, body language.
The things people don't say out loud. It's how you know when someone's ready for the check or when they need another few minutes, when a date is going well or when you should have the manager on standby. And what did your people watching tell you about me? That you're tired of being what everyone expects. That you showed up tonight hoping for something real and weren't surprised when you didn't get it. That part of you has already decided you don't get to have what normal people have, connection, partnership, someone to come home to, because you traded that possibility for success a long time ago. He didn't deny it. He just looked at me with those dark eyes and something shifted between us, some wall coming down. "What time do you finish?" he asked. "Excuse me?" "Your shift. When does it end?" 11. "Why?" "Because I'd like to continue this conversation somewhere that isn't your place of employment, if you're willing." He hesitated, and for just a moment, the confident billionaire disappeared entirely, replaced by someone almost vulnerable. I know this is strange. I know we don't know each other, but I haven't talked to anyone like this in maybe ever, and I'm not ready for it to be over just because a clock says so. My heart was doing something complicated in my chest, some mixture of hope and terror and a certain knowledge that this was a terrible idea. "You know this is crazy, right?" I said. "You're Daniel Chen. You're on magazine covers. You have buildings named after you. I'm a waitress who can't afford the appetizers here, let alone the wine I'm currently stealing from your table." "So?" "So we're not exactly from the same world. We're not compatible by any metric that makes sense." "Compatible according to who?" He leaned forward, those dark eyes intense. "According to the woman who walked out. Because she decided 20 minutes was enough time to know everything worth knowing about another human being. According to some dating app algorithm that matches people based on income brackets and education levels and photographs that probably don't even look like them in real life. According to reality. According to the way the world actually works. Reality is overrated." He smiled, and it was like watching the sun come out after a storm, warm and unexpected and impossible to look away from. "Have dinner with me." "Maya, not here. Somewhere you actually like. Let me buy you food you'll actually enjoy eating instead of wine you're technically stealing from a customer." "I'm not stealing. You offered. I'm offering now too. Dinner? Tonight? Anywhere you want." I should have said no. Every sensible part of my brain was screaming that this was a fantasy, a glitch in the matrix, the kind of thing that happens in movies but never in real life. Billionaires don't fall for waitresses. Cinderella stories are cautionary tales about setting realistic expectations. But his eyes were warm and his smile was hopeful, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, someone was looking at me like I was actually interesting. Not invisible. Not a servant to be summoned with a snapped finger. Actually worth paying attention to. "Yes," I said, "but I'm picking the restaurant." "Deal." He waited for me until 11 o'clock. Sat at that table for nearly 3 more hours, ordering coffee and dessert and making easy conversation with me whenever I passed by, never once checking his phone or looking impatient. He was, without doubt, the most patient person I'd ever encountered. When my shift finally ended, I found him outside, leaning against a sleek black car that looked like it cost more than my entire apartment building. "So?" he said, straightening when he saw me in my street clothes, a worn jacket and comfortable jeans that probably cost less than his socks. "Where are we going?" I took him to a taco truck. Not just any taco truck. The best taco truck in the city, tucked away in a parking lot 3 blocks from my apartment building. Maria and her husband Eduardo had been running it for 20 years, and their carnitas were legendary among those fortunate enough to know the place existed. Daniel Chen, in his custom-tailored suit and his designer watch and his shoes that probably cost my monthly rent, stood in line behind a construction worker and a group of college students. He ordered whatever I recommended without looking at the menu, And then he ate street tacos, sitting on an overturned milk crate in a parking lot while the city hummed around us, and he told me with complete sincerity that it was the best meal he'd had in months. "You're just saying that to be polite," I accused, licking salsa from my fingers. "I'm not. When you have money, everyone wants to impress you. They take you to restaurants with 3 Michelin stars and portions designed for people who apparently don't enjoy eating. They order wines that cost thousands of dollars because they think that's what you want. Everything is performance. Everything is trying to prove something." He gestured with his taco at the truck, at the mismatched plastic chairs, at Eduardo flipping meat on the grill, while Maria shouted orders in rapid Spanish. "No one ever takes you to a taco truck. No one thinks you'd even be capable of enjoying something this simple and real. And are you? Capable of enjoying it?" He looked at me across the parking lot, salsa on his chin, and smiled. "I'm starting to think I might be capable of enjoying a lot of things I'd written off." We talked until nearly 3 in the morning, long after the taco truck closed and Maria kissed my cheek and whispered in Spanish that my new friend was very handsome. We sat on a park bench under flickering streetlights and shared the stories we usually kept hidden. He told me about his father, who had started the company from nothing and worked himself into an early grave trying to make it successful. About his mother, who had dealt with that loss by retreating into pills and grief, and eventually a care facility where she didn't always recognize him when he visited. About his sister Victoria, the only family he had left who actually felt like family, who kept trying to set him up on dates because she was terrified he was going to end up alone. I told him about my father's illness, the way cancer had eaten away at him and at our family's finances simultaneously. About my mother's exhaustion, the dark circles under her eyes that never seemed to fade, even after he finally passed. About my brothers, who did their best but had their own struggles, and about the dream of a restaurant that got smaller and more distant with each passing year. "You should go back," he said when I finished, "to culinary school, to your dream." "Dreams don't pay rent." "They can if you let them, if you have the right support." I shook my head. "I can't take money from you. We just met. I'm not going to be one of those stories about waitresses who con rich men into—" "That's not what I'm offering." He took my hand and I felt the contact like electricity, like something important clicking into place. "I'm not offering to buy your dream, Maya. I'm offering to be someone who believes in it. Someone who reminds you it matters, even when reality is trying to convince you otherwise." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. When he drove me home, he walked me to my door like a gentleman from another era, and when I turned to say goodnight, trying to figure out how to end this strange and magical evening, he leaned in and kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, a question rather than a statement, asking permission to continue. And when I grabbed his tie and pulled him back down for a second kiss, the kind of kiss that makes promises neither person is entirely sure they can keep, I felt something fundamental shift in my chest. "I want to see you again," he said when we finally broke apart, both breathing harder than the kiss warranted. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, the day after. Every day you'll let me. You don't even know me. Then I'll learn. We'll learn each other." He pressed his forehead against mine. "Say yes, Maya." Yes. That was how it started, with a blind date gone wrong and a chair taken on impulse in a taco truck at midnight, with 2 people from different worlds who somehow recognized something real in each other. The weeks that followed felt like a dream I was afraid to wake from. Daniel showed up at Lumiere every night at 9 o'clock, sat at table 7, and waited for my shift to end. We went to taco trucks and late-night diners and hole-in-the-wall places that didn't have websites or reservations. He ate whatever I put in front of him and declared it better than any 5-star restaurant. He took me to his penthouse for the first time 3 weeks in, and I nearly turned and walked right back out. It was obscene, the amount of money represented by those walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city, furniture that belonged in museums, art that cost more than I would earn in several lifetimes. "This is where you live? This is where I sleep." He pulled me gently inside when I hesitated at the threshold, but it's never felt like home. Just an expensive hotel room I can't check out of. "What would make it feel like home?" "You," he said simply. "Having you here makes it feel like somewhere I want to be."
I fell in love with Daniel Chen in pieces, and then all at once. Fell for the way he listened when I talked. Really listened like my words mattered.
Fell for the way he remembered tiny details from our conversations and brought them up weeks later. Fell for the man behind the magazine covers, the one who was lonely and hopeful and so afraid of being hurt again that he'd built walls around himself that I seemed to somehow slip right through. The tabloids found us 2 months in. Billionaire's secret waitress girlfriend. The headlines were brutal, the comments worse. Gold digger, social climber, opportunist, temporary entertainment for a bored rich man. I tried not to read them. I failed. They're everywhere, I sobbed when Daniel found me crying in my tiny kitchen. Everyone is saying, everyone is wrong. He knelt beside me, took my hands in his. I don't care what they print. I don't care what anyone thinks. What we have is real. The realest thing in my life, and that's all that matters to me. But your company, your reputation. My reputation is mine to manage, and I'm managing it by standing next to the woman I love and telling the world that I'm lucky to have her. It was the first time either of us had used that word. Love. He said it like it was obvious, like it was simple, like loving me was the easiest thing he'd ever done. I love you too, I whispered. God help me, I love you too. His PR team released a simple statement. Daniel Chen is in a committed relationship with Maya Rodriguez. He asks that the media respect their privacy. When he showed up at Lumiere the next night and sat at table 7 and ordered dinner like nothing had changed, the message was clear to everyone watching. She's not a secret. She's not a scandal. She's mine. The proposal came 6 months to the day after I first sat down at his table. He took me back to Lumiere. Same restaurant, same table, same wine, a 2015 Chateau Margaux, because that's what started everything. When the dessert course arrived and there was a ring sitting in the center of the plate, where the chocolate soufflé should have been, I forgot how to breathe. Maya! He was already sliding out of his chair, going down on one knee right there in the middle of the restaurant where his blind date had walked out on him, where I had sat down on impulse and changed both our lives. 6 months ago, you broke every rule to sit with a stranger who needed exactly what you had to offer. You saw past the money and the reputation and the walls I'd built, and you found someone worth loving underneath all of it. His voice cracked slightly. I don't want to spend another day of my life without you in it. You're my best friend and my favorite person, and the reason I finally understand what home is supposed to feel like. He held up the ring, a diamond that caught the candlelight like it had captured stars. Marry me, please. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of the woman who sat down. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Every single person was watching, silverware forgotten, conversations abandoned. Yes, I said through tears. Yes, yes, 1,000 times. Yes. He slid the ring onto my finger, stood and kissed me, while the entire restaurant erupted into applause. We married in October, in the garden behind the house where his mother had once grown roses, now carefully restored. Victoria stood as my maid of honor and cried through the entire ceremony. My brothers walked me down the aisle together, and even they were crying, though they'd never admit it later. I wore a vintage dress I'd found in a second-hand shop. Daniel wore a suit that cost more than my old apartment, and loosened his tie before the vows because I told him he looked uncomfortable. I hired a waitress, he said in his vows, making everyone laugh through their tears. I got everything I ever needed. I stole some wine, I countered. Ended up with a lifetime supply and a pretty decent husband. When the officiant pronounced us married, when Daniel kissed me with the autumn leaves falling around us and our families cheering, I finally let myself believe that the fairy tale was real. That was 2 years ago. The catering company I always dreamed of exists now. Not because Daniel bought it for me, though he offered approximately 10,000 times, but because loving him taught me that my dreams mattered enough to chase. It's small but growing, and every dish tells a story, just like I always imagined. Daniel still works too much. Some things don't change. But he comes home every night, no matter how late. He learned to cook, badly, but he keeps trying. He leaves love notes in my lunch bag like we're still in the honeymoon phase. Maybe we are. Maybe we always will be. The tabloids call us a fairy tale now, a Cinderella story for the modern age. I used to hate that comparison. I'm not Cinderella, I didn't need rescuing, but I've made peace with it. Sometimes the best stories are the ones nobody expected. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how close I came to walking away, to clearing that table like I was supposed to instead of sitting down at it, to treating Daniel Chen like just another customer having a bad night instead of a person who needed someone to see him. But I sat down. I took a chance on a moment that could have cost me everything. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel murmurs in the darkness, pulling me closer. "The restaurant. That first night. The wine you stole, or the way I completely fell apart when Emily walked out? The way you looked when I sat down, like you couldn't believe anyone would bother." He's quiet for a moment. Then, "I couldn't believe it. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, and I thought, if this woman is willing to sit with a stranger who just got publicly humiliated, maybe there's hope for me yet." "There was always hope for you, Daniel. You just needed someone to help you see it." "I needed you." He kisses my temple. "Only you." The billionaire's blind date stood him up, walked out after 23 minutes because she decided he wasn't worth her time. I was just the waitress who sat down, and somehow, impossibly, beautifully, against every odd that exists, we found forever in an empty chair. Some tables turn in ways you never see coming, and some love stories begin with one simple act of kindness toward a stranger having the worst night of his life.